The maintenance bay of Station Kepler 7 hummed with the constant drone of recycled air and distant engine cores. Jake Martinez wiped grease from his hands as he finished replacing a faulty plasma coupling on a cargo hauler. The work was routine, but he preferred it that way. After 3 years fixing ships on this remote trading outpost, he had found a rhythm that suited him perfectly. The Veltar crew of the hauler chittered their thanks in their native language before departing. Jake nodded politely, though he still struggled with their complex vocal patterns. Most species on the station kept to themselves, conducting business with the cold efficiency of interstellar commerce. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, and many aliens viewed them with suspicion or indifference. As Jake began cleaning his tools, a commotion erupted from the docking bay entrance. Angry voices rose in the universal trade language, followed by the distinctive hiss growl of the Cathari species. Jake looked up to see a crowd gathering near the main airlock. 3 Cathari warriors stood in ceremonial armor, their feline features twisted with disgust. Between them cowered another Cathari, but something was wrong with her appearance. Where the warriors displayed the typical golden-brown fur with dark stripes that marked their species, this female was completely white. Her fur gleamed like fresh snow, and her eyes were a pale pink that seemed almost translucent. Beside her huddled 2 small cubs, no larger than house cats, their white fur matted and dirty. They pressed close to their mother, making soft, mewling sounds of distress. "Cursed bloodline!" one warrior spat, his words echoing through the bay. "The spirits have marked you and your spawn as unclean. You bring shame to all Cathari." The albino female kept her head bowed, her ears flattened against her skull in submission. "Please, honored warriors, my cubs need food and shelter. Surely the station has room for outcasts?" "Not here," another warrior growled. "The station master has already been informed. No ship will take you. No trader will deal with you. Find your own way to survive, White Fur." Jake watched the scene unfold with growing anger. He had learned enough about Cathari culture to understand what was happening. Albinism was considered a terrible curse among their people, a sign of spiritual corruption that tainted entire family lines. The mother and her cubs were being banished, cast out to face certain death in the cold void of space. The warriors turned and marched away, their claws clicking against the metal deck plates. Other aliens in the docking bay quickly dispersed, unwilling to be associated with the outcasts. Soon, only the white-furred family remained, huddled together near a cargo container. Jake set down his tools and walked over. The mother looked up at his approach, her pink eyes wide with fear. She had likely never interacted with a human before, and his alien features probably seemed as strange to her as hers did to him. "You okay?" Jake asked, crouching down to appear less threatening. The female tilted her head, processing his words. Most aliens on the station spoke at least basic trade language, but she seemed confused by his simple question. "I am Sharia," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "These are my cubs, Kes and Mora. We are no longer welcome among our people." Jake glanced at the 2 small cubs who peered at him with curious eyes. Despite their fear, they seemed alert and healthy. "What will you do now?" Sharia's ears drooped further. "I do not know. No ship will transport us. No one will trade with cursed ones. We have enough food for perhaps 2 days. The weight of their situation hit Jake like a physical blow. This family was going to die, slowly and painfully, because of something completely beyond their control. The genetic accident that had given them white fur instead of the normal coloring was now a death sentence. "That's bullshit," Jake said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Sharia flinched at his harsh tone, pulling her cubs closer. Jake immediately softened his voice. "Sorry, I mean that's not right. You didn't do anything wrong." "The spirits have marked us," Sharia replied, as if stating an obvious fact. "We are unclean. To associate with us brings the same curse." Jake shook his head. Where I come from, we call that superstition. You're not cursed, you're just different. He stood up and looked around the nearly empty docking bay. An idea was forming, dangerous and probably stupid, but he couldn't just walk away. Look, I've got a small workshop in the lower levels. It's not much, but it's warm and safe. You and your cubs can stay there while we figure something out. Sharia stared at him in shock. You would help us? But the curse— There is no curse, Jake said firmly. Just scared people who don't understand genetics. He gestured toward a maintenance lift. Come on, let's get you somewhere safe. Sharia hesitated for a long moment, then slowly gathered her cubs and followed. As they descended into the station's lower levels, Jake wondered what the hell he was getting himself into. Helping outcasts could make him an outcast too, and humans already had a precarious position in galactic society. But as he watched the two small cubs pressing close to their mother, he knew he couldn't have made any other choice. Sometimes doing the right thing meant taking risks, and Jake had never been one to back down from a challenge. The workshop occupied a converted storage bay in Section 7, far from the main commercial areas. Jake had slowly expanded it over his 3 years on the station, turning it into both his professional space and his home. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with spare parts and half-finished projects. A small living area occupied one corner, with a cot, food processor, and basic amenities. It's not fancy, Jake said, activating the lights, but it's private. Sharia stepped inside cautiously, her cubs clinging to her legs. The space was cluttered but clean, with the organized chaos that marked a skilled craftsman's domain. You live here? She asked, noting the personal items scattered among the tools. Most of the time, I keep irregular hours, so it's easier to just stay close to the work. Jake cleared some space near the living area and activated a portable heater. The cubs immediately moved toward the warmth, their small bodies shivering from the station's recycled air. Are you hungry? Jake asked. I've got some protein bars and Nutri-Paste. It's not great, but it's food. Sharia's stomach growled audibly at the mention of food. She had been rationing their supplies, giving most of it to her cubs while going hungry herself. We cannot pay, she admitted. I'm not asking for payment, Jake replied, already programming the food processor for a basic meal. Just consider it help between neighbors. As the machine hummed to life, Jake pulled out his personal tablet and began researching Cathari physiology. If he was going to help this family, he needed to understand their needs. The database showed that they were obligate carnivores with specific dietary requirements, but the station's standard protein supplements should be adequate. The food processor chimed, and Jake served up 3 portions of Nutri-Paste enhanced with the appropriate vitamins and minerals. Sharia accepted the bowl with trembling hands, then knelt down to help her cubs eat. Thank you, she whispered, and Jake heard the genuine gratitude in her voice. As the family ate, Jake continued his research. Cathari society was complex and hierarchical, with strong spiritual beliefs that governed every aspect of life. Albinism was indeed considered a curse, a sign that the spirits had withdrawn their favor from an individual and their bloodline. But Jake had grown up in a world where genetic differences were understood and accepted. On Earth, albinism was a medical condition, not a spiritual failing. The idea that these 3 individuals should die because of their genetics struck him as fundamentally wrong. Sharia, he said, looking up from his tablet. Tell me about your situation. How did you end up here? The female finished feeding her cubs, then sat back on her heels. I was born to the Cathari colony on Veltar Prime. My parents kept my condition hidden for as long as possible, but eventually the authorities discovered the truth. They were forced to exile me to preserve their own standing. And the cub's father? Sharia's ears flattened. He was not white-furred, When the cubs were born with my coloring, he abandoned us to protect his reputation. The local authorities gave us passage to this station, but no further. Jake felt his anger rising again. So they just dumped you here to die? It is the way of our people, Sharia said simply. The cursed cannot be allowed to contaminate the pure. That's not the way of my people, Jake replied. Where I come from, we judge individuals by their actions, not their appearance. He stood up and began pacing, his mind racing through possibilities. There's got to be somewhere you can go, some planet or station that would accept you. Sharia shook her head sadly. Word spreads quickly among Cathari traders. By now, every outpost and colony knows of our presence here. None will risk the spiritual contamination. Jake stopped pacing and turned to face her. What if you went somewhere without Cathari? There are thousands of systems out there, hundreds of different species. Surely some of them wouldn't care about your fur color? But how would we reach such places? And how would we survive among aliens? The same way I survive among aliens, Jake said. By being useful. By working hard and proving your worth through actions instead of bloodlines. He sat down across from Sharia, his expression serious. What skills do you have? What can you do? Sharia considered the question. I was trained as a systems analyst before my exile. I understand computer networks and data management. I also have some knowledge of trade protocols and logistics. Jake's eyes lit up. That's perfect. Half the ships that dock here have computer problems. If you can fix their systems, you'd be worth your weight in rare metals. But I am cursed, Sharia protested. No captain would hire me. Not if they knew you were Cathari, Jake agreed. But what if they didn't? The idea was forming in Jake's mind, wild and dangerous, but potentially brilliant. What if we could disguise your appearance? Make you look like a different species entirely? Sharia stared at him in shock. That would be deception, a violation of honor. Sometimes honor is a luxury you can't afford, Jake replied. Your cubs need food and shelter. If pretending to be something else keeps them alive, isn't that worth a little dishonor? The two cubs had finished eating and were now exploring the workshop, their natural curiosity overcoming their fear. They poked at spare parts and sniffed at unfamiliar scents, their tails twitching with interest. Watching them, Sharia felt something shift inside her chest. These cubs were her responsibility, her greatest treasure. If there was a chance to give them a future, shouldn't she take it? What did you have in mind? She asked quietly. Jake grinned, the expression transforming his grease-stained face. Leave that to me. I've got some ideas that might just work. Over the next 3 days, Jake threw himself into the most ambitious project of his engineering career. His workshop became a laboratory of transformation as he researched, experimented, and built the tools necessary to give Sharia and her cubs new identities. The first challenge was physical appearance. Jake studied the database extensively, looking for species that shared similar body structures to Cathari, but had different cultural associations. He finally settled on the Silvani, a peaceful trader species known for their white and silver fur patterns. They were rare but respected throughout the galaxy, and their spiritual beliefs were nearly opposite to those of the Cathari. The bone structure is close enough, Jake explained, showing Sharia the anatomical comparisons on his tablet. With some careful cosmetic work, we can modify your appearance to match their basic characteristics. Jake had fabricated a special dye that would temporarily darken specific patches of their white fur, creating the silver-tipped pattern characteristic of Silvani. He had also designed contact lenses that would change their distinctive pink eyes to the golden color typical of the trader species. The transformation will need to be renewed every few weeks, Jake warned as he applied the first test patches, and you'll need to learn their customs and speech patterns. Sharia submitted to the process with nervous trust. The dye felt strange against her fur, and the contact lenses were uncomfortable at first, but as she looked at herself in Jake's makeshift mirror, she gasped in amazement. "I look different," she whispered, turning her head to examine the silver patterns Jake had created. "You look like someone who deserves a chance," Jake corrected. The cubs were more difficult to work with, their natural energy making them squirm during the application process. But eventually, Jake managed to transform them as well. Little Kess and Mora now appeared to be typical Silvani younglings, their white fur decorated with elegant silver markings. The physical transformation was only part of the solution. Jake spent hours teaching Sharia about Silvani culture and customs, drawing on his extensive database of galactic species. The Silvani were known for their meditation practices and philosophical discussions, very different from the honor-based warrior culture of the Cathari. Remember, Silvani speak in a more flowing melodic pattern, Jake coached. They rarely use harsh consonants, and they prefer indirect communication over direct confrontation. Sharia practiced the speech patterns while Jake worked on creating false identity documents. This was the most dangerous part of the plan, as forged identification could result in serious legal consequences. But Jake's years of working with ship computers had given him insights into the galactic data networks that few others possessed. "I'm creating a legitimate identity in the Silvani Colonial Registry," he explained while his fingers danced across multiple keyboards. "As far as any official scan will show, you're Salaria Moonwhisper, a systems analyst from the Andorian Trade Collective. And my cubs? Kessa and Moira Moonwhisper, your daughters. The Silvani don't have the same family naming conventions as Cathari, so the names work better in their culture." Jake paused in his typing and looked at Sharia seriously. "Once we upload these identities, there's no going back. You'll need to commit to being Silvani, at least in public. Can you do that?" Sharia looked at her cubs, who were playing with some of Jake's spare parts, their transformed appearance making them seem like entirely different children. "For them, I can be anyone." The final piece of the plan required Jake to call in some favors. Captain Torres of the merchant vessel Distant Shore owed Jake for emergency repairs performed during a plasma storm 6 months earlier. Jake contacted him through secure channels, explaining that he had a skilled systems analyst looking for transport to the outer colonies. "She's got impressive credentials," Jake said during their encrypted video call. "But she's been out of work for a while and needs a fresh start." Captain Torres, a weathered human with cybernetic eye implants, studied the false documents Jake had transmitted. "Silvani, eh? They're good people, very reliable. What kind of work is she looking for?" "Anything in systems management or data analysis. She's willing to work for basic transport and meals until she can establish herself somewhere. I've got a cargo run to the Epsilon cluster next week. Could use someone to optimize the navigation computers and cargo manifests. If she's as good as these records suggest, I might be able to offer permanent work." Jake felt a surge of relief. The Epsilon cluster was far from Cathari space, a region dominated by human and AI colonies where Sharia's transformed identity would be much easier to maintain. "I'll let her know. When do you depart?" 5 days, Dock 7, Bay 3. After ending the call, Jake turned to find Sharia standing behind him, her golden contact lenses reflecting his workshop lights. "It is done?" she asked in her new, more melodic speech pattern. "Almost. You've got 5 days to perfect your new identity. After that, you're on your own." The next few days passed in intensive preparation. Jake drilled Sharia on Silvani customs while teaching her the technical skills she would need to maintain her cover. He showed her how to interface with different computer systems and how to speak in the professional terminology that other species would expect from a systems analyst. The cubs adapted to their new identities with the flexibility of children. They quickly learned to respond to their new names and seemed to enjoy the game of pretending to be different people. Jake created simple toys from spare parts to keep them occupied while their mother studied. On the final day, Jake made one last modification to their appearance. He had fabricated small jewelry pieces in the Silvani style, delicate silver chains and pendants that would complete their disguises. As he helped Sharia put on the necklace, she caught his hand. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why are you risking so much for strangers?" Jake considered the question carefully. "Where I come from, we have a saying, 'With great power comes great responsibility.' I had the knowledge and resources to help you, so I had a responsibility to use them. But the danger to yourself? Sometimes doing the right thing is dangerous," Jake replied. "But not doing it when you can is worse." Sharia squeezed his hand gently. "I will not forget this kindness. Someday, I will repay the debt. Just take care of your cubs and make a good life for yourselves. That's payment enough." The morning of departure arrived with the artificial dawn cycle of the station's lighting system. Jake helped carry Sharia's few possessions to Docking Bay 7, where the distant shore waited like a promise of freedom. Captain Torres met them at the airlock, his cybernetic eye scanning Sharia's false documents while his organic eye assessed her professional demeanor. "Celaria Moonwhisper?" he asked, testing the pronunciation. "Yes, Captain," Sharia replied in perfect Silvani accent. "Thank you for this opportunity." "Your references are impressive. Let's see if your work matches your reputation." Torres turned to Jake with a slight smile. "Thanks for the referral, Martinez. I'll take good care of your friend." As Sharia gathered her cubs and prepared to board, she turned back to Jake one final time. In her golden eyes, he saw gratitude, determination, and something that might have been hope. "Safe travels, Celaria," he said formally, playing his part in the deception. "May the stars guide your path, Jake Martinez," she replied, using the traditional Silvani blessing. Then she was gone, disappearing into the ship with her cubs. Jake watched through the bay windows as the distant shore undocked and maneuvered toward the jump point. Within hours, they would be light years away, beginning new lives in a distant corner of the galaxy. Jake returned to his workshop, which felt strangely empty after hosting the family for a week. He began cleaning up the evidence of his activities, destroying the chemical formulas for the fur dye and wiping the computer systems he had used to create the false identities. But as he worked, Jake realized that something fundamental had changed within him. For years, he had been content to live on the margins of galactic society, fixing ships and avoiding complications. Now he understood that neutrality wasn't always possible. Sometimes you had to choose a side, even when the choice was dangerous. 3 weeks later, Jake received an encrypted message through channels that officially didn't exist. It was brief, but clear. Moonwhisper family thriving in Epsilon 7 colony. Systems analyst position secured. Deep gratitude for unexpected friendship. Stars guide you always. SM. Jake smiled as he deleted the message. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, 3 outcasts were building new lives because a human mechanic had decided that genetic prejudice was bullshit. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of galactic politics, but it felt like a victory worth celebrating. He had no way of knowing that his actions would eventually trigger changes that would ripple across known space, challenging ancient prejudices and forcing entire civilizations to confront their deepest assumptions about worth and identity. All he knew was that he had helped a family in need, and that felt pretty good. As Jake returned to his workbench and picked up his tools, he made a decision that would define the rest of his career. From now on, his workshop would always have room for outcasts and refugees, for anyone who needed a chance to prove their worth beyond the accident of their birth. The maintenance bay of Station Kepler 7 hummed with its constant mechanical rhythm, but Jake Martinez was no longer just another mechanic fixing ships for profit. He had become something more dangerous and more necessary, a man who believed that every sentient being deserved a chance at dignity, regardless of what they looked like or where they came from. And in a galaxy where prejudice and fear often determined who lived and who died, that kind of man could change everything. 6 months after Sharia and her cubs departed on the distant shore, Jake Martinez had gained a reputation that extended far beyond his mechanical skills. Word traveled through the hidden networks of the dispossessed and desperate, whispered in cargo holds and maintenance tunnels. There was a human on Station Kepler 7 who helped those nobody else would touch. It started small. A Grextai engineer with a neurological disorder that made her unemployable among her own people found work maintaining Jake's expanded workshop systems. A pair of Veltar siblings, too young and too poor to buy passage home after their trading venture failed, earned their fare by helping Jake organize his increasingly complex operation. Jake's workshop had grown from a converted storage bay to a network of interconnected chambers in the station's lower levels. What had once been his simple living space now housed a rotating population of refugees, outcasts, and misfits from dozens of different species. Each brought unique skills and perspectives that made the operation more valuable than the sum of its parts. The transformation hadn't gone unnoticed by station management. Administrator Vextal, a humorless Kethari bureaucrat, summoned Jake to his office on a cold Tuesday morning. "Mr. Martinez," Vextal began, his golden eyes fixed on a datapad displaying Jake's expanded operations. "Your activities have attracted considerable attention from the station board." Jake sat in the uncomfortable chair designed for Kethari physiology and waited for the other shoe to drop. He had been careful to operate within station regulations, but he knew his growing influence made some aliens nervous. "Your repair business shows remarkable efficiency gains," Vextal continued. "Turnaround times have improved by 37% over the past 6 months. Customer satisfaction ratings exceed station averages by significant margins." This wasn't the conversation Jake had expected. "We work hard to provide quality service." "Indeed. The board is curious about your methods. How does a single human achieve such results?" Jake chose his words carefully. "I believe in matching the right people to the right jobs. Different species have different strengths. When you combine those strengths effectively, everyone benefits." Vextal's ears twitched, the Kethari equivalent of raised eyebrows. "You employ individuals that other businesses refuse to hire. I employ individuals who are skilled and willing to work hard. Their personal circumstances don't affect their professional abilities. And if the board were to officially recognize your operation, perhaps offer you expanded facilities and formal contractor status?" Jake leaned forward, intrigued. "What would that involve?" "Exclusive maintenance contracts for certain classes of vessels, priority bay assignments, access to advanced equipment." Vextal paused meaningfully. "And protection under station charter regulations." Jake understood the implication. Official recognition would make it much harder for other species to pressure his workers or sabotage his operation. It would also legitimize his unconventional hiring practices in the eyes of galactic law. "What's the catch?" Jake asked. "No catch. Simply excellent business sense. Your operation generates significant revenue for the station. The board wishes to ensure its continued success." After the meeting, Jake returned to his workshop with mixed emotions. Official recognition was everything he had hoped for, but it also meant increased scrutiny and bureaucratic oversight. As he entered the main bay, he found his team gathered around a new arrival. Dr. Yilhara was a Silvani physician whose hands shook uncontrollably due to a degenerative nerve condition. Among her own people, the affliction had made her a pariah, unable to practice medicine despite her brilliant medical knowledge. She had spent years drifting between stations, taking menial jobs to survive. "She knows more about xenobiology than anyone I've ever met," explained Zara, the Grextai engineer who had become Jake's unofficial second-in-command. But she can't hold surgical instruments steady enough for traditional practice. Jake studied the elderly Silvani, noting the frustration and pain in her golden eyes. What if she didn't need to hold surgical instruments? 3 days later, Jake unveiled his latest innovation, a robotic surgical system controlled by neural interface. Dr. Yilhara could use her extensive knowledge to guide the precise mechanical hands while her condition was completely bypassed. "It's brilliant," she whispered, tears streaming down her furred cheeks as she performed a complex procedure on a practice simulation. "I can work again. I can heal people." The medical bay Jake constructed around Dr. Yilhara's robotic system became another crucial component of his growing operation. Spacers often suffered injuries that station medical facilities weren't equipped to handle, and Dr. Yilhara's combination of knowledge and technology made her the most sought-after physician in 3 sectors. But Jake's greatest success came from an unexpected source. Deep in his encrypted files, he maintained communication with the Moon Whisper family through their carefully constructed false identity. Silaria Moon Whisper had not only established herself as a systems analyst in the Epsilon cluster, she had begun using her position to help other Cathari outcasts escape their homeworlds. The network she created was subtle but effective. False identities, safe passage arrangements, and employment opportunities for those willing to abandon their old lives and embrace new ones. Jake's workshop became a crucial way station in this underground railroad, providing temporary shelter and transformation services for refugees fleeing genetic and social persecution. It was through this network that Jake learned about the growing political movement among younger Cathari. Students and intellectuals in several colonies had begun questioning the ancient prejudices that condemned individuals like Sharia and her cubs. They called themselves the New Path and advocated for judging people by their actions rather than their genetics. "Change is coming," explained Kethtal, a young Cathari activist who had arrived seeking passage to the outer colonies. "But it will take generations. In the meantime, people like you provide hope for those who cannot wait for society to evolve." Jake found himself thrust into a role he had never sought, symbol of human values in a galaxy struggling with ancient prejudices. Diplomatic delegations began visiting his workshop, studying his methods, and interviewing his diverse workforce. Journalists wrote articles about the human experiment in social integration. The attention brought both opportunities and dangers. Progressive species praised Jake's inclusive approach and offered trade partnerships and technology exchanges. Conservative factions denounced him as a dangerous radical who threatened traditional social structures. Several attempts were made to sabotage his operation or frame his workers for various crimes. Through it all, Jake maintained his focus on the individuals who came to him seeking help. Each person had a story, a unique combination of skills and circumstances that made them valuable despite their outcast status. Jake's gift was seeing past surface appearances to recognize the potential beneath. When Taraven, a former Veltar military engineer, arrived with facial scars that marked him as a deserter, Jake put him to work designing improved safety systems for the workshop. The engineer's intimate knowledge of combat scenarios made him uniquely qualified to protect the vulnerable population Jake harbored. When Silex, an artificial intelligence fleeing persecution from organic supremacists, sought sanctuary, Jake helped her establish a new identity as a ship's computer specialist. Her digital consciousness proved invaluable for coordinating the increasingly complex logistics of the operation. 2 years after Sharia's departure, Jake received an unexpected visitor. Ambassador Vel Shan of the Galactic Council arrived unannounced, accompanied by a small diplomatic entourage. The ambassador was a distinguished Altarian whose species had long advocated for universal rights and social progress. "Mr. Martinez," the ambassador began after touring the workshop, Your work here represents something unprecedented in galactic society. A practical demonstration that cooperation transcends genetic and cultural barriers. Jake wiped his hands on a rag, uncomfortable with the formal attention. I just provide jobs for people who want to work. You provide dignity for people whom society has discarded, the ambassador corrected. And in doing so, you challenge the fundamental assumptions that drive interspecies conflict throughout known space. The ambassador's visit culminated in an offer that would change everything. Official recognition by the Galactic Council and funding to expand the operation to other stations throughout the galaxy. The Council wishes to establish a network of integration centers, Ambassador Velshan explained. Places where outcasts and refugees can find not just shelter, but opportunities to rebuild their lives and contribute to galactic society. Jake considered the proposal carefully. It represented everything he had worked toward. Systematic change that could help millions of displaced individuals. But it also meant losing the personal touch that made his workshop special. I have conditions, Jake said finally. Local autonomy in hiring and operations, protection for all workers regardless of their legal status, and absolute prohibition on forced repatriation. Agreed. And one more thing. I want Celeria Moonwhisper as my deputy administrator. She understands this work better than anyone. 3 months later, Sharia returned to Station Kepler 7 for the first time since her exile. She had maintained her Silvani identity so successfully that even she sometimes forgot her original appearance. Her cubs, now adolescents, had grown up believing they were Silvani and possessed the confidence that came with belonging to a respected species. "You've built something amazing," she told Jake as they walked through the expanded facility. "When I left here, I was focused on simple survival. Now you're changing the galaxy." "We're changing the galaxy," Jake corrected. "This only works because people like you prove that everyone deserves a chance." The ceremony establishing the first Galactic Integration Center was attended by representatives from 43 different species. Jake stood on the platform, looking out at an audience that included former outcasts, who now held respected positions throughout galactic society. Dr. Yilhara had become the head of xenobiological research for the Epsilon cluster. Zara had founded an engineering firm specializing in adaptive technologies for disabled workers. Keth Tal had returned to Keth Ari space as part of a new political movement advocating for genetic equality. But for Jake, the most meaningful moment came when Sharia's daughter, Kessa, now a brilliant young systems analyst in her own right, approached the podium to speak. "My mother and I would not be alive today without the compassion of one human who chose to judge us by our character rather than our appearance," she said, her words carrying clearly through the translator systems. "Today we celebrate not just the establishment of these centers, but the principle they represent, that every sentient being has value, regardless of the circumstances of their birth." As applause filled the chamber, Jake reflected on the strange path that had brought him to this moment. He had started as a simple mechanic fixing ships for pay. Through one act of compassion toward a desperate family, he had become part of something much larger than himself. The galaxy was still far from perfect. Prejudice and fear continued to drive conflict between species, and millions of beings still suffered discrimination because of factors beyond their control. But change was possible, one individual at a time, one act of kindness building upon another. Standing in that chamber, surrounded by beings from dozens of different worlds, Jake Martinez understood that humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy wasn't their technology or their military might. It was their stubborn insistence that everyone deserved a chance to prove their worth, regardless of what they looked like or where they came from. In a universe vast beyond imagination, where countless species struggled to find their place among the stars, that simple human principle had become a beacon of hope. And sometimes, Hope was enough to change everything.